So, I want to talk a little bit about war and the technology that has advanced in various stages that is kind of have made huge changes to society and psychology and sociology and definitely economics as well. And it happened over time, if you think about it, because if you think about warfare in its raw form, where basically people battling against people, and the scriptures talk about that. The Book of Mormon has a lot of war in it, and it's a lot of swords against swords, scimitars against scimitars, the usage of breastplates, and a few reinforcements around the areas you're defending. But basically, very close combat, people to people, and that's what it was all about. And so that must have gone on for a long, long time before things like gunpowder were invented. Now, gunpowder changed the whole landscape of warfare, and it went from this idea of a close combat where you could actually be safe inside a big castle in a lot of instances with really good reinforcements, to where all of a sudden they didn't need to have warfare at a close distance. They could, from a distance, lob missiles at you, rudimentary forms of bombs, and blow things up. And also then use guns to shoot from a distance. So that changed the whole nature of warfare from this very close combat, hand to hand, and well, of course you had archery and bows and arrows and things like that. So it wasn't all hand to hand, but there was a lot of person to person. But it was close, and then it got more distant. In our discussion about transportation, we talked about bringing things together, but in warfare, we really talk about advancements, bringing people apart, allowing for warfare from a distance. And I'm going to give you a very simple explanation of this, something that I understand very well. In England, where I'm from, you can't just have guns. So, a few criminals have guns. There are certain police units that have guns, but guns are really not prevalent in the United Kingdom, where I'm from. So when people fight and people get angry with each other, as people do, just like they do anywhere else, they don't really shoot each other. People don't die from shootings very often, but they have knives, and people do stab one another from time to time. But let me kind of explain to you what I think is a very big difference psychologically. It makes a difference. If you're going to stab somebody or actually strangle them or fight or something like that close in, you're right in their face, in their space. And so it's got to be real. You really have physical conflict with somebody to make it happen. If you're going to stab them, you've got to be right there and do it, and they're there and you're there, and that's how it is. So psychologically, you've got to be okay with being in somebody's space and hurting them, which I think is a shame, by the way, that it's even possible and the children learn at such a young age that it's okay to have physical conflict and hurt other people. And I just wish, this is kind of my preachy thing, I just wish that all parents all over the world would teach their children from a young age that other people are important. And it's not just about us, it's about how we treat people and how we make people feel. Because children learn to be quite brutal at a young age, very selfish, and some parents just teach them that's okay. In fact, they teach them to be like that because they teach them that they're going to have to do that to get ahead in the world or something like that. That's the kind of the general idea of a certain kind of parental teaching that I've seen a lot of. And there are very few parents who are teaching their children, you know what, no, you do have to take care of what other people feel and to take care of the people around you. And that makes a difference. So anyway, but still, if you're going to have close physical contact, stab or strangle or hurt somebody like that, you have to get into their space and be and be aware and not care about the fact you're really hurting somebody. But imagine you have a gun and you can be at 200 feet away, or hide behind a wall, or just shoot at a car driving by, or at anybody who happens to be there. In my mind, this is a huge psychological difference, because you don't have to be in somebody's face, you don't have to be close up to them. It's a different kind of psychology that you could have to harm somebody. It can almost be unreal. It can almost be like a film, because you're not close to them, but you can still pull a trigger and shoot somebody. Somebody passing by, you don't even know who they are. You don't have to get right up in their face and have physical contact. And I think there's a difference. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's more shootings, or sorry, more violence in countries where guns are prevalent, because it's too easy to be at a distance and harm somebody, because you're not so aware of their personal presence, if that's a way to say it. So so advancements in war technology helped this, because they took people away from other people in the conflict, and allow people to, first shoot arrows long distances at other people. That's one thing. But then your gunpowder allows you to shoot somebody from a long distance. Very effective. Your old armor isn't going to help you anymore. Your old defense systems aren't going to help you anymore. So that's, I think, the biggest first advancement is gunpowder. But then you've got to fast forward a long time to what I think are the other major advancements. I kind of want to paint a picture for you, because in the kind of medieval days, you had this kind of warfare in Europe that almost had a set of rules to it. It was like a game of Risk, if you've played Risk. There were rules to it, and armies would confront other armies, and they'd have cavalries, and they'd have foot soldiers, and they'd have other things. But there were kind of rules of engagement that generally speaking, the different commanders of armies would abide by. And as they would kind of maneuver their forces against the other forces, they'd have a battle, and there'd be winners and losers, and there'd be rules involved in it, and even what would happen to those that were defeated. There was kind of like a noble set of laws about war to some degree, and then but you'd still have these, even though you had guns, you still had cavalries, and cavalries, men on horses, riding with guns and also with swords. And this idea of warfare that still had a lot of people involved, went into World War I, which was just an atrocious, terrible, horrible thing in the history of the world, where so many millions of people were slaughtered in this kind of this horrible war in Europe, where you get these two armies that were lined up against each other, mostly inside of the territory of France, and that they were all dug into trenches either side, and they were basically shooting at each other. And from time to time, one group would get out of their trenches and try and run towards the others, and get shot down by machine guns and slaughtered. Now, but you've still got this idea of just simple guns and people. And then during World War I, a British colonel invented what we now know as the tank. And he kind of had the idea from seeing how tractors were able to move across very muddy areas like where the warfare was happening in France, and thought that'd be a good idea. And it was a very secret invention that they actually told the workers building that they were building water tanks, water holders, which is why it was called tanks, interestingly enough. And anyway, so the first models didn't work very well. Well, finally they introduced in 1917, I believe, the first tank that actually got into the war. And then, can you imagine, this is what I'm trying to get to, the psychology of, you've been fighting kind of army to army in these trenches with guns of various kinds, and I think they also had a bit of chemical warfare, which again is a huge leap forward, the idea of being able to drop some chemicals on somebody and kill or harm a vast number of people. That's another one I hadn't really thought about talking about. But imagine you're in this army when you're used to using guns mostly, and all of a sudden this metal contraption on caterpillar tracks comes over, out of a trench, and just comes towards you, and you try and shoot at it, and the bullets just bounce off, and it just kind of overruns your position because it's a tank. It's made out of metal. You can't do anything about it. To me, this is a real huge shift in the psychology of warfare, where before, really the strategy was men against men, and now it is machines. And you've got this big tank machine that you just cannot beat. So you've got to find a technology response to how to defend against a tank. And I think this was the beginning of the huge change. Also, at the same time in World War I was really the introduction of submarines. The idea had been around for a long time, but as far as a practical application, World War I again was the first time. Interestingly enough, also with airplanes in war. Really, World War One was really the time when that was first happening. So World War One was this time in history where lots of things changed as far as the technology of warfare, and it changed really from human wars to wars of technology. And it didn't change overnight, because in World War II there was a lot of warfare that kind of was people-based. But still, by the time they had World War II, they had fairly advanced planes, big bombers, fighter planes, and a lot of tanks. So this idea, in a very short space of time, had taken the wars to a completely different level. And then in World War II, they invented the missile, or the rocket-based weapon, and the Germans introduced this with their V2 bomb, which is also called a Doodlebug, which they fired at England during World War II. It wasn't, super effective, but it was a new thing, and it was terrifying to the English, especially in London, that it was fired out a lot. So you have this very new trend of, I don't even need to send people over, or even planes. I'm just going to send a rocket over from one country to another. Again, expanding the distance between the people involved in a war, and that becomes you don't have to think so much about the people you're gonna hurt. I think if they're in front of you, it's not easy. I don't think I could kill a person in war. I'd be worried about their family. Somebody losing a father. I think I'd rather sacrifice my own life than be the reason for taking somebody's father out of their family, or somebody's brother, or somebody's son. That idea just hurts me a lot. But what about if there's an intense war and I'm a computer programmer programming how the trajectory missiles will fire on? Well, I'm not thinking about individuals. I'm not thinking about people. I'm thinking about strategy in a war. So you get a missile, and that's how that first started. And then, really, after World War II is really where the line. I think a line can be drawn during World War I, where you've suddenly got technology involved in war, mechanized technology involved in warfare, which really had not been to any substantial degree before that. But now you've got mechanics, tanks, airplanes, and submarines. Which again, a submarine is a huge step forward. You can't see the thing. You can't. It's not fair anymore. You can't see this. You can't. It's not like a ship. You can see, and you can have an exchange of cannons. Now you've got this thing that's invisible. How do you fight that? And so you have to invent new technologies to defend yourself against these new technologies. And after World War II, I think it really did begin during World War II, because during World War II, then you've got the invention of all inventions as far as warfare is concerned, which is the nuclear weapon. And both sides were racing to try and invent this weapon. And it's a terrible, terrible thing. We all hope that good came out of that ultimately. But these massive, huge weapons of destruction that can be dropped from a plane at the time, again, you don't have to be in somebody's face and then press a button where you watch people die. You can drop it from thousands of feet, where you do not have to be personally involved. And then so you've got the nuclear weapon, and that changes everything. That changes everything, because now you've got a weapon that can basically obliterate a whole country. Not one weapon, but if you have several of them, you can obliterate cities. And taking, again, the psychology of warfare to a whole new level. Because if two countries wanted to face off and have a nuclear war against each other, they could really just wipe each other out without leaving their own countries. Again, so that is again a total separation of people, and now it just becomes totally strategic. But the ability to do such a mass destruction is such a terrifying thing. But then so you've got that technology, and then so ever since World War II, basically it's been a race for technology, better missiles, better planes, better communication systems, better satellites, better all these things are now technology, and it's wars of technology to some degree. It becomes different when countries are fighting against insurrections, for example. That's a different kind of warfare. But countries against countries, and hopefully there never will be a big country against country war, are just technology driven. And if Russia and the United States had ever actually gone to war, it would have been this just terrible war because of all the technology and the missiles and the bombs that they possessed. When countries are fighting against insurrection or terrorism or something like that, then you're not fighting against a country that's going to send a big bomb at you. You're fighting against individuals who can disappear into the community and other things. So there you do have more of a kind of a person-to-person kind of warfare going on to some degree. But even then, you've got a new invention that is drones, and I think this is what I think of the future is of warfare, where you haven't even got a pilot flying the plane. You've got these drones firing missiles at places and killing members of Al Qaeda in the borders of Pakistan or even inside Pakistan, and they don't even have people inside them. So I think this is the big change. So the big changes I've talked about in the past have gone from person-to-person, very close combat to gunpowder, where people can fight wars from a longer distance away, to where then you add in these mechanized war machines like tanks, submarines, and airplanes. Again, changing the whole philosophy and strategy and psychology of war. Then you go to the weapons of mass destruction, which again change it to a whole new level of separation of people and people, where you can just press a button and send over this huge rocket and destroy a whole country. And now you add in the ability to send in unmanned, mechanized war machines, planes, tanks, whatever you want to do, and remote control them. And I think there were films in the 80s that kind of saw this coming. If you can have kids who are incredibly good at controlling computer games, who maybe that's the future of armies, where they just train these kids to be great at playing the game, and then it's in reality drones that are doing the actual attacking. That's a kind of a very different psychology and change in how that impacts society. So anyway, so that's just some perspectives on the changes we have because of the technology of warfare. Thanks for listening.